The stories you are about to hear are true. Some names and locations have been changed at the author's discretion. Welcome to Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories.
The construction site. Before I start, let me give you a description of where I live. It's a small town, mostly desert, mostly friendly people, but of course there are a few sour apples. One day, my friends and I, let's call them Tony and Mark, were hanging out at my house. My house is like 70 feet from a super Walmart that is being worked on. My buddies were staying the night at my house because my parents were out of town for the weekend. We played just about every video game I had. Then we got bored out of our minds, so Tony, the youngest and smallest of the group, he was 15 with Mark and myself being 17, said, "We should go over to the Super Walmart and explore it." Mark and I really don't like breaking the law or anything along the lines of getting in trouble in any way, but we went along with Tony. It took us about 10 minutes to get ready and leave, and then we found an open gate to get through. The start of our exploration seemed normal for a work-in-progress building, but we noticed that there was a way to get into a basement. I was getting weird vibes from the door saying we should not go in. I turned to walk away from it all when Mark stopped and asked me, "Are you getting a creepy vibe from the basement too?" I just nodded and tried to leave again when Mark yet again stopped me. "Hey, man, maybe we should go down there to make sure nothing bad is going on." He told me this is a code 5. And Mark and I have a code rule for different situations. 5 was the worst of them all. I turned around and started to head to the door with me and Mark, and we noticed that it was open, and suddenly, Tony was missing. We looked at each other and rushed into the basement to find him. As we got down the stairs, red flags lit up for me right away. It was mildly damp, and light was on the walls, making the place brighter than the outside. It looked rather big down there. I looked around till I noticed Tony on the ground, and I ran over to check on him. When I got by him, I noticed a pipe on the ground, and I started to shake him, saying, "Wake up, moron!" Still shaking him when I heard Mark's voice yell for me to look over into him. When I did so, I could not believe what I saw. 2 guys in bloody shirts and black pants were standing right next to him. The one on the left spoke up first.
"What are you assholes doing in our basement?"
he said in a growl-like voice. At this time, Tony started to wake up. I got up grabbing the metal pipe, and I kind of hid it behind my back and spoke up. "Oh, sorry that we thought we just heard something down here. Don't mind us, we'll just be on our way." I said that as I was helping Tony to stand up and started heading towards the stairs.
"You're not going anywhere,"
the one on the right shouted as he started to advance towards us. I pushed Tony over to Mark because Mark was a little stronger than me, and I figured that he could help him out better than I could. We started up the stairs, and these 2 guys rushed up the stairs right behind us. I swung the metal pipe at the guy right behind me and smashed him clear on his knee, and he fell down. Then I booked it upstairs with the pipe. When I got up, Mark slammed the door shut, and I slipped the pipe through the door handles, locking it. I wish I could say this was the end, but we chose to not go home just in case we were being followed. Sadly, I soon figured out we were being followed by the guy I didn't hit. So much for my lock. We did about 5 laps around my neighborhood and didn't go straight home. And then that's when I noticed the guy was still following us. I told my friends, "Don't freak out, but that guy is about 50 feet behind us, trying to stay hidden. We're going to turn left here and head to my brother's house. He'll know what to do." As I said this, I noticed the guy was speeding up some, so I whispered loudly, "All right, fuck it, book." As we were running, I heard him behind us, also sprinting, but he was losing speed and was more than 80 feet away by now. We got home to my brother's house and told him what had happened. He told us, "All right, you guys, stay put. I'm going to grab my shotgun and scare him off." And instead of grabbing his shotgun, he reached under the couch and grabbed a pistol, then walked outside. About 2 minutes later, we heard 2 gunshots, and my brother walked back in and said, "Call the cops now. I got one in the leg and the other limped away." After I called the cops, they came and got one of the 2 and questioned us about what had happened and if we knew who they were. After the police left, we stayed at my brother's house for the night and didn't go to sleep until about 6 a.m. when the sun rose up. So far from the info I heard, they both got caught. Turns out they had kidnapped someone and killed them in the basement of the Super Walmart. if I was not quick to act, and me and my friends might have died that night. Now, if you're wondering how I remember so much about this, it's because this only happened 3 weeks ago. And I'll tell you what, I'll never mess around a construction site ever again. Who was my stalker? I'd like to begin by apologizing for the length and the poor quality of writing of this. I'm typing it as I remember it all, and I'm a little uneasy talking about him. Honestly, it has been 3 years since the incident, and I still feel sick thinking about it. My name is Lauren. I'm nearly 21 now, but when I was 18, I finally moved out of my parents' house to go to college. I was so excited. I mean, I'm really close to my family, but I couldn't wait to get out of the small town that I lived in and finally live in a bigger city. I had a friend there, then a junior at the university. She was studying abroad for the year and was lucky enough to sublet her room for a low price. The house was old, with peeling paint and dead grass, and the only plants on the lot was an ancient oak tree towering over the small home. It wasn't great, but it was a pretty good deal for a freshman. I had 4 roommates, all of them upperclassmen. 3 lived on the second floor, and 1 in the bonus room attic upstairs. My room was on the first floor, facing the back of the property. It was only large enough for a queen bed and a dresser, but I didn't mind, as I was happy just to have a room separate from my sister. The other girls were really nice and laid back. I didn't have any friends there, and they were really welcoming and invited me to go to parties and other fun events. They introduced me to their friends and buy me alcohol. They felt like the cool older sisters I never had. But it really wasn't my scene. I'm more of a quiet, avoid people at all costs kind of introvert. But I told myself college was the place to change that. Anyway, they decided to host a barbecue a few weeks into the semester. As the night progressed, the small party basically turned into a rave. More and more people arrived, most of them already blackout drunk. I myself did have a few drinks, but I definitely wasn't wasted. One of the roommates introduced me to her friend Ben, who, like me, was hanging out on the outskirts of the crowd. He was cute, tall, lean with brown eyes and dark hair, and definitely my type. He was on the quieter side, a little nerdy, but that didn't bother me. In fact, I kind of liked that about him. Over the next few weeks, I saw him around campus a lot. At the library, coffee shop, and even at an antique store. He joked that it was a sign that we were meant to be, and we both laughed. Ben asked me if I wanted to go to a friend's party with him that weekend. He said he hated that scene, but it might be fun if I was there. I agreed. All week I really looked forward to seeing him. He picked me up early and we got food before the party, and when we got to his friend's house, Ben was the perfect date. He understood my usual dislike for crowds of strange people and made a special effort to make me feel comfortable. At first, it was a lot of fun. Later that night, one of Ben's extremely drunk friends decided he was okay to drive home, and Ben took off to stop him. It was taking a while, and a short, round-cheeked guy came up to chat with me until he returned, noticing how awkward I was by myself. He introduced himself as Simon, a friend of Ben's. He seemed nice, so we talked and we drank. "You're too good for him, you know," the friend said, changing the subject of our light conversation. He eyed me seriously, as if he were sizing me up. "I'm sure that's not true," I forced a small laugh, but his expression told me he wasn't joking. I didn't understand. I felt an arm on my shoulder, and Ben interrupted. "You guys talking about me?" He grinned. "Yes," I said, smiling, relaxing into him. "Good," Ben said, shooting a pointed look at the other guy. Simon's face reddened, and he scuttled away quickly. "Fucking creep," Ben muttered. "What do you mean?" I asked, watching the small, thin Simon where he stood in the corner. "Yeah, I didn't want to freak you out, but he's been staring at you all night. He hasn't taken his eyes off of you. It was weird and definitely a little creepy, but I soon forgot the incident." 20 minutes later, I started to feel sick. I cursed myself for drinking so much beer, which I knew usually made me nauseous. I didn't want Ben to see me throw up, and I made a quick excuse to go to the bathroom. The room was spinning, and I had to hold myself up on the wall. I found the bathroom, and within seconds I was on the floor. My limbs were heavy, and I couldn't even pull myself up to sit. I'm paralyzed, face down on this gross linoleum floor, and at this point I'm freaking out, and I can't stop crying. I was way too fucked up for only a couple of beers. I heard knocking, and a boy calling my name. "I know you're in there, Lauren." I felt far away, like some horrible dream. "Let me in." Even with the throbbing bass, I could tell it was Simon. "Lauren, let me in." He wouldn't stop yelling and pounding on the door. It was so loud I thought the door was surely going to split in half from the sheer force of his blows. "Leave me the fuck alone," I wanted to scream, but it only came out as a small whimper. I was never really religious, but I prayed that the door would hold against this guy. A moment later I heard another shout, and then what sounded like a fight. "Lauren, it's Ben. He's gone now. Are you okay?" I still couldn't answer. My mind was so fuzzy and everything was going dark. I can't remember what happened next. Even now, I can't recall all the details. I woke up a few hours later. It was dark and I had no idea where I was, but it felt like a bed. My head was pounding and I felt extremely hungover. I didn't move, partially from whatever the hell I had been slipped and partially because I was petrified. The heavy weight was on my waist, and it took a minute for me to register that it was actually someone's arm. My heart was pounding and I strained to hear anything. When I finally managed to calm down, I heard a familiar whirring sound. It was my laptop charging. I gathered all my courage and reached slowly to the left, hoping to feel the metal yank chain of my lamp, and I did, and it lit the room. My roommate, Kate, was passed out in bed beside me, and she woke up with the light. Ben was fast asleep in the office chair. Kate said she was so glad I was okay. She said Ben had brought me home after fighting off Simon. He had wanted to take me to the hospital, but the roommates had convinced him not to, as I was underage and probably not in any real danger. Ben had reluctantly agreed, but insisted to stay and make sure that I was okay. I still felt sick the rest of the day, and Ben stayed to play nurse. The roommates jokingly called him the hero, my knight in shining armor. Ben smiled, surely accepting the praise. Late that same night, however, Ben had to leave. He was a pizza delivery guy and had to work the late shifts. So, after he goes, I get a text from an unknown number, telling me they had a great time at the party and they liked the way my legs looked in my skirt. I asked who it was. You know who it is. I quickly blocked the number and suspected Simon. I showed the other girls and they told me to save the text just in case. Ben started coming over nearly every night and soon became my first real boyfriend. It was definitely a new experience. I had not by any means forgotten the incident, but after not seeing Simon or going to any more parties, I relaxed a little. It helped having Ben, my hero, by my side. Everything was going pretty well. Ben agreed to take our relationship slow as I was both a virgin and scarred from that last incident. After about a month and a half of constant contact, however, I felt like I needed a little space. I decided to go home for the weekend, which was about 3 hours from the school. Ben was a little upset that I wanted to leave, but he said he understood. I didn't have a car, and my parents didn't want to drive 6 hours round trip, so I had to take the train. Ben drove me to the train station and kissed me goodbye. He had to go into work soon and had to drop me off an hour early. About 30 minutes before the train pulled in, my phone starts buzzing. Again, it was an unknown number. "That suitcase is too big for a weekend," the text read. "You're not trying to leave me, are you?" I got hysterical and started searching around the room. There, on a wooden bench across the lobby, sat Simon. His buzzed blonde head was semi-covered in a hood, and he had no bags. Our eyes locked immediately. All I could hear was my heart hammering against my ribcage. My stomach turned, and I sat there, frozen. I finally willed myself to move and leapt from my seat, surprising the couple beside me. "Who the fuck do you think you are?" I shouted, suddenly so angry I couldn't control myself. Simon looked from side to side as if he was waiting for one of the now staring passengers to intervene. As if on cue, a large man in an Amtrak uniform stopped me and warned me that if I didn't calm down, I was going to have to leave. I still tried to push past the employee, but when I finally got around him, Simon was gone. I was furious and wanted to follow him. I wasn't usually the fighting type, but I am 5'8", a few inches taller than this guy, and I was fit enough to get in a good hit or two. The male worker was shouting at me to get my things and just go, but a female employee intervened and quickly attempted to pacify me. I began to cry as I gave her a summary of what had happened. She was a very sweet older woman, and she held me as the others in the station continued to watch. She said I reminded her of an old college roommate who had gone through a similar situation. The woman said her friend had not been as lucky as I was, and I should thank God that Ben was there for me. I agreed. The train finally arrived and I boarded. I called Ben and recapped the episode. He sounded nervous and offered to take off work and pick me up at a stop along the way. I hadn't seen any trace of Simon in the car, so I said no. Not 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed again. "You're so sexy when you're scared." "Fuck off," I replied. "I like a girl with spirit. They're more fun to break." This pumped the creep factor off the scale. I called Ben, but he didn't pick up. He was probably on a delivery, so I just left a voicemail to call me back. I had the overwhelming sense of fight or flight, neither of which were possible while on a 150-mile-an-hour train. When I finally got to the station near my house, my family was huddled on the platform, talking to Ben. Confused, I stepped out to greet them. After the barrage of family bear hugs, Ben leaned in. I called back 5 times. When you didn't answer, I was worried. He whispered low so no one could hear. There was no reception in the country, I explained. Look, he said, and passed his phone to me, a text from the blocked number. I don't remember the exact words, as it wasn't my phone, and I don't really know what they were, but it said something about the guard dog leaving me alone all weekend, and he thought Benny would put up more of a fight. Then when I didn't answer his calls, Ben panicked and drove straight to my hometown. My parents were excited to meet him, but a little confused, as I had not mentioned him much, and I never really told them about the party. Ben, of course, quickly charmed and won over the whole family, even my dad, an ex-Marine who was the stereotypical overprotective father of my 16-year-old sister and me. He even warmed up to him. They asked him to stay the weekend, and he slept in my little brother's room. My mom and sister both were impressed how attractive he was and joked that I needed to keep an eye on him. Later that evening, I got another text. You called the guard dog? You're no fun, babe. Ben held me tight to his chest and told me he was never going to leave my side. In the next few days, he kept to his word. He took the week off of work and ended up sleeping even in my bed with me, rather than the living room couch I used to make him sleep on. While he was with me, the disturbing messages stopped. In class, though, and when I eventually got a job at the coffee shop on campus, I would get the, yeah, you look good in those jeans, or I love to watch you work messages. This guy knew when I was alone. They started to come so often that they started to become a normal part of my daily routine. Soon after, I had started taking self-defense classes with the campus police. I was becoming more and more confident that Simon was not a real physical threat anymore, as I had not seen him, and I was extremely careful to watch out for myself. But the less I cared about Simon, the more intense the messages became. I told my cop instructor about the stalking, and was advised to change my number. I did, and only gave it out to a few trusted friends and family. Despite my best efforts, however, the text still persisted. You know you can't get away from me. I know where you live. I've been inside. He even described the picture of my family that sat on my desk. I felt so violated and finally filed an official report to my instructor. I called in every time I received a text, but said they couldn't do much unless he physically threatened me, which is bullshit if you ask me. I told Ben to go back to work and that I wasn't so worried anymore. He was delivering pizzas one night. Kate and the other housemates went out to a senior party off campus, and I was enjoying the quiet solitude. It was exam week, and I was up around 3 in the morning studying for a final the next day. I was starting to doze off, so I packed up the books and turned off the music I had on. I turned out the lights and drifted to sleep. I awoke to the sound of crunching snow and a scraping noise on the side paneling of the house. I held my breath and slowly slid my bedside drawer open. I kept a 7-inch Marine-grade combat knife, a graduation gift from my father, in there. I used to joke about how ridiculous it was, but I appreciated his paranoia now. But when I felt for it, it was gone. I was so scared. I was on the edge of hyperventilating. The scratching became increasingly louder, harder, and faster. I saw the silhouette of a man through the curtain, but was too damn petrified to open them, terrified to see what was on the other side. Go away, my voice cracked as I screamed. I began to cry, and I hated myself for being such a coward. I tried to sound more confident as I yelled again, Leave me the fuck alone, I'm calling the fucking cops. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. The operator said there was a car nearby and would be there in about 5 minutes. I ran to check the locks on the first floor doors and windows as I stayed on the line with the operator. The noises persisted for another minute that passed like an hour. There was a deafening thud, and I shrieked. I heard sirens nearby and waited for the cop to pull in the driveway before meeting them outside. It was nearly below freezing, and I was still in my pajama shorts and t-shirt, but I don't remember even feeling the chill. I explained through sobs what had happened, and that I thought this guy named Simon had been harassing me for months. The officer pulled me inside and told me to warm up. She said there was another officer on the way and told me to lock up behind her as fast as while she could check out the yard. The other policeman arrived and happened to be my self-defense trainer. He helped the woman search the area. I called Ben and left a voicemail. They returned a few minutes later and said that whoever it was had left. They followed the footsteps to the road but couldn't find anyone, as the road had just been salted and plowed very recently. The two fell quiet and looked at one another. What is it? I asked. It was obvious they were keeping something from me. They were silent for a moment, before my instructor told me to get dressed. I did, and we walked in silence outside. We avoided rooting the large footprints and followed them to the side. My heart dropped to my stomach, and my knees felt like jello. Under the window of my bedroom was a rushed message etched into the paneling. It just said, Lauren. The woman broke her silence and said she wasn't sure why he would leave this knife behind. Sure enough, there in the snow lay my blade. As a final fuck you, he had used my own knife. The cops waited with me until Ben came. They said they would post an officer in front for the night, and they would investigate Simon and review everything more in the morning. I called my housemates to let them know. A very drunk Kate answered on the fourth dial and said they would just stay at the house they were already at. Ben offered to let me stay over, and I grabbed the things I would need for the exam. We went to his apartment. He gave me the key to his place, and he told me he loved me for the first time. I was surprised at the timing, but after what felt like a near-death experience, I just told him that I loved him too. He convinced me to move in with him, and while I wasn't comfortable living with a boyfriend yet, I agreed until I found another place to live. The rest of the night was uneventful, but I didn't sleep. I went back to Ben's after my morning exam. He was finishing up an exam himself, and when I got back to his place, it was empty. I was making a to-do list of things to move when I got a call on my cell phone. It was my instructor. I'll never forget this conversation. Hello? He cut me off mid-greeting. Are you alone? Yeah, why? He sounded relieved. Where are you? At my boyfriend's. I need you to get out as quickly as possible. I'm on my way. Give me 10 minutes, he said. What's going on? I said, frustrated and concerned. His footprints, they're the same size as the ones last night. In the background, I could hear him flick the sirens on. Simon's? I asked hopefully. No, Ben's. Do you know where he is? Ben's? I asked, and almost laughed at how ridiculous it sounded. He's probably on the way back from his exam. Get out of that house, he stressed. His serious tone told me that it was not a joke. I hopped to my feet. I flung the door open and ran straight into Ben's hard chest. I gasped, dropping the phone from my shaking hands. The cop's voice blasted from the speaker. Ben picked it up, holding it to his ear. Who is this? She'll have to call you back, he murmured, his eyes not breaking from mine. Babe, what's wrong? His tall frame blocked the doorway, and he slowly herded me back inside, turning the lock behind him. I was just going for a walk, I whispered, barely audible. Without a coat? He continued, inching closer. You'd catch a cold. His usually relaxed demeanor was now cold and predatorial. Can I have my phone back? He looked at the device in his hand, holding it high above his head as I tried to snatch it. Please, Ben. Tears welled in my eyes and my heart pounded. You have to get it from me, he smiled and chuckled. I jumped but missed. He wrapped his arms around my shoulders, pressing my body to his. I love you so much, Lauren. Do you know that? I shuddered and nodded slowly. And you love me too, right? I nodded again, unable to speak without bursting into tears. Say it, he said, yanking my hair back and forcing me to face him. I love you, I cried. That's why you'll never leave me, right? Because I protect you. I'm the only one who can. He bent down and pressed his lips hard against mine. Adrenaline really is amazing. I know the self-defenses class has really helped out, and anybody who has the opportunity to take them should. But when the situation arises and you need to make a split-second decision to save your life, your mind goes blank. I bit his lower lip with enough force that my teeth sank right through it. Blood gushed down his chin and into my mouth as he shrieked. I took his moment of shock to knee him hard in the balls, and he groaned as the air escaped his lungs. I ran past him nearly to the door when he yanked my left arm back, wrenching it from its socket. I screamed and landed on my ass. I did this for us, he roared, blood gurgling in his mouth. He spit and kicked me in the ribs. A sickening crack sent pain shooting through my side. You're a fucking psycho, I yelled. Sirens wailed in the distance, and relief washed over me. In minutes, 5 cops rushed the door, swarming in and pinning him to the floor. I remember his red, angry face looking at me as his split lips squished against the ground. I thought to the night of the party, where I felt helpless, and Ben was the one to help me. Now he was the helpless one, cuffed with an officer straddling his back. I love you. I didn't do anything wrong, Lauren. Tell them, Lauren, he shouted between the cops and me. I fucking love you. What are you doing? Tell them. My instructor helped prop my head up, afraid to move me until the ambulance came, just in case I had any serious injuries. It turns out the cops had brought Simon in earlier for questioning. He had a solid alibi and explained that he had no idea what was going on. He said he knew Ben was kind of shady since his freshman year of college, when he suspected Ben of drugging and sexually abusing a friend of his. That night at the party, he saw me in bad shape and rushed to the bathroom to help me. Ben came in and kicked the shit out of him, knocking him out. He had tried to warn me before all of this had happened. After the big scene at the party, Ben had no choice but to bring me home with my housemates. When they constantly praised him for being the hero, he decided it was the only way I would want to keep going out with him, if he was the only security I had. When the police went to talk to his employers, they said he had quit about a week before the incident at the train station. So he stalked me for months, saying he was at work when he was really outside my window, breaking into my room. They found a second cell phone in his glove box with all the texts. Apparently, every time he thought I was drawing away from him, he would terrorize me to bring me closer. He wanted me to all to himself, and managed to pull me away from my friends and family, saying that they would only worry if I told them, but that they couldn't do anything anyway. I had become so isolated and dependent on him. The police went back to my house after Simon's interrogation and noticed the footprints. Ben was smart enough to change shoes, but was still the same size, which were a good 4 sizes bigger than Simon's. Not only that, but the side of my house was on a hill, and Simon's head would only come to maybe an inch or two above the sill, unlike Ben, who was 6'3". Ben ended up being charged with aggravated assault, though the attempted rape charges were dropped, as there was no proof of it later. He's now in his 3rd year of a 6-year sentence. Simon moved schools, choosing to finish his senior year at a community college instead. I ended up becoming pretty close with my cop instructor, who will hopefully be my partner in the next year if I pass my police exam in the fall. Thanks for listening to this story, and if you managed to make it all the way through. I'm still not sure why I decided to write it. Maybe it was more for me than anyone else. It's nice to let it out, as it's difficult to talk about. I know it's not as awful as a lot of the other stories that you hear here, but it still isn't something I would wish on any of my enemies. Well, maybe except Ben himself. I think I was abducted. These events happened to me in my sophomore and senior year of high school. I lived in a rural area in Georgia, right next to a military base. I mean, literally, I could walk to the military base from my property and see signs that said, "Don't enter here because of firing range," and that sort of thing. This is important because some of the sightings I saw were probably flares, according to my ex-military father. The flares I saw would be very bright, and then go away, but I could make out the outline of the flares even when they were gone. I also vaguely remember the flares turning back on, but over the course of time, I can't really be too sure. Anyways, onto the weird things. I vividly recall waking up in my bed one night and a being approaching me. This dark being had bright eyes, a bright mouth, and was kind of small. It reminded me of the girl from the Ring movie. I was scared shitless and paralyzed. I've never passed out before, but when the being got near me, I felt like I passed out because the next thing I remember, I awoke in my bed. I have another vague memory of another being sitting on my bed at night and me not being able to get up. I attribute these memories to sleep paralysis, as I did some research on it, and the experiences were similar to what scientists say is sleep paralysis. Now, the next instance, I can't explain at all. It started with the most vivid dream of my life. I awoke in my room where I had the sleep paralysis. The sky was a dark red. A voice spoke to me and told me that my family and I had to commit suicide by dawn. I went back to bed and awoke and walked into my parents' room and saw nothing but a dark red tint. I mean, everything was dark red. I decided I was going to make a run for it and got into my car. I started driving down a gravel road that was outside of our house, and the voice spoke to me again and said, "I know what you are trying to do," and said some other commanding stuff that didn't really make any sense to me. Anyway, as I drove down the road and got onto the main highway, I lost control of the car and ended up in a ditch. I recall looking at the dirt in the ditch and being paralyzed. I think I was physically ejected from my car in the ditch. And now here comes the really creepy shit. I woke up from that dream around 3 a.m. and I could not sleep at all. I decided to post my dream on Yahoo Answers to see if anybody could help me determine what that dream meant. I stayed up until school time, it was a weekday, and then I started to drive to school on the same route as in the dream. As I got onto the highway, there was a flipped car to near where I was ejected in the dream. By near, I mean on the other side of the road, on the top of the hill. The driver was ejected, and I called the police because the first person there didn't have a phone. I didn't get a good look at the guy because I was scared, but I do remember a pretty hot EMT who happened to show up after me and say the accident was pretty bad. That is the last event I remembered. I live in a big city now. And the reasons, which I always say to myself as a joke, is so that I don't get abducted by aliens. I'm not really sure if that really is a joke or if my subconscious is speaking to me and wishing something else didn't happen. The evil in the basement. I wanted to tell you something very disturbing which happened to me as I was coming into puberty. I think I was around 10 or 13, but I'm not exactly sure and may have been a little younger. I'm now 59. My family lived in a small white house with an earthen basement. That was more like a cellar, though, I suppose. No cement floor or walls. Our furnace was down there, as well as my mom's preserves, and we stored winter fruit and other things down there as well. As children, we would be sent down often to bring things up for our mother. We had a little dog and a female cat who used to go down there with us. The basement always smelled like fresh earth. However, at times there used to be a terrible odor that would upset me and the dog and cat. When this happened, they wouldn't go downstairs. The cat would just disappear to another room, and the dog would stand at the top and growl and bark, and then suddenly take off. I suppose I should mention a little about how we got down to the cellar in the first place. The house was originally just a small 2-bedroom place with a veranda on the side where the trapdoor to the basement was. My brother and I shared a room until he turned about 8 or 9, and then my folks closed in the veranda and made it into a bedroom for him. The heavy trapdoor which led to the cellar was right in the corner of his room, and it was the only entrance down there. It was really heavy, about 2 to 3 inches thick, and to open it, we as kids had to lift it up, rest it on our bended knees, and then push it all the way up. My dad had put a large locking hinge of some sort on the wall to hold it up while we went down. There was a nasty presence down there. At the time that this happened to me, I didn't know that my brother was having problems with it as well. I only knew that a light would wake me up and come into my room, but just a little ways inside. Something was calling to me, and it wanted me to follow it. Not knowing what it was, or even if it was real, like any child, I would just cover my head under the blankets. Because I didn't go with it and just laid there in fear, the light would pulse larger, and it seemed as though it would get closer to me. Then I would scream for my mom and dad. The light would get smaller and drift out of my room and go down a very short, maybe 4 or 5 foot hallway, and the thing would turn the corner, go past the bathroom, and back into Nick's room and disappear. And this happened off and on for about 3 years. Now my brother Nick's story. He knew that something was down there. He would hear the trapdoor open often at night and see 2 red lights come out, 2 red orbs that he said exuded hate, and that as he would get more frightened, they would get larger, and the door would open more. But if he started to hate them back, the stronger his emotion got, the red orbs would become smaller, and would retreat into the cellar, and then the trapdoor would close. On one of the occasions that it came to me, he followed it, and when I screamed for my parents, it started coming back towards him. He ducked into the bathroom, and then followed it back to his room. He never told anybody about this until he was an adult, well into his 30s. He didn't want us to think that he was losing it, he said. When I saw the light and would tell my folks, they would just tell me that it was dreams or I was having a nightmare. And that was that. At the time, I knew it had happened, but I guess I also wanted to believe them and follow their advice. But since I spoke to Nick about it, now I truly believe that all that stuff was real. About 15 or 16 years ago, I was telling my mom's older sister about this, and I said, "You probably are going to think I'm ready for the loony bin, but this is what happened." And I told her what I've just told you. After I finished, she in turn related to me something that my dad had told her, and now when I think about it, I remember my dad never going into the cellar by himself. A bit about my dad. He was an Italian, originally from Italy, and came here to Canada when he was 14 years old. He himself had had a number of unusual events happen to him, seeing and hearing things similar to this. Anyway, on this occasion, my aunt told me that my mother had once gone to visit her sister in British Columbia for a few days, and leaving my dad and us home alone. My dad had to go into the cellar for something, and I guess something not nice chased him around down there. He never described what it was that he saw, but my aunt said that he came out to her place after it happened, white-faced and upset. After that, he never went down there alone. The house is still standing, and people never seem to stay there too long. I don't know if they experience anything or not. I just noticed that it's always either for rent or for sale. My folks owned it from about late 1952 to around 1978. We then sold it to an elderly lady who lived there for a year or two, then she sold it, and over the years it has changed hands a number of times and been rented out a lot. I believe it's for sale again. I know that before Christmas of this year it was, but I'm not sure if it still is or if it's been sold. It upsets me when I see children living it, because I believe that they are the most vulnerable. I can't say if there are any further occurrences there now. I just know what happened to us. You probably think that I'm nuttier than the fruitcake, and I have been looked at weirdly by a few folks whom I've told, but I talk about it anyway. And I realize that not all entities are evil or a danger to someone, but they are there nonetheless, good and bad, be they spirits who are tied here for some reason or another, or something else entirely. I've had a few other experiences as well, but this one was the scariest. The strangest case I ever worked on. I'm a licensed private investigator. I don't believe in the occult. I don't believe in the paranormal or anything of that sort. The case I'm about to describe did not change any of this. You really have to put a lot of trust in your senses as a PI, and bogging those senses down with deductions spotlighting supernatural intervention is a pretty piss-poor plan if you want to get real answers in cases. I do, however, have my own weird personal superstitions and idiosyncrasies. Wouldn't really be a human if I didn't. I try to keep them separate from my job, but sometimes they pop up in the back of my mind regardless. For example, I sometimes feel that reality stops functioning correctly in complete isolation, that when things are left completely unobserved for a long amount of time, the unknown, unseen spaces cease to exist. Stuff that shouldn't be able to physically happen is suddenly no more than child's play, and unwelcome things that have no right existing play their fickle little games with us. I don't try to think about it too much, and I most certainly don't give the thought any power. Nonetheless, there's always the occasional case in which that idea is particularly tempting to indulge. And this is one of those times. I was sitting in my office finishing up one of my previous cases, just general reports left, lots of paperwork. The tedium was broken up when my phone began to ring. Picked it up only to hear the voice of one of my closer PI friends on the other end. We chat casually for a few minutes, mostly just me trying to get my mind off the writing pains in my wrist, but it's obvious that he's called for a reason. He explains that he's been on a missing person case, a small boy around the age of 4. His mother and father had divorced a few years ago, and his mother was currently holed up in my area. The boy had apparently been missing for quite a while, and the police had been contacted, but they had turned up nothing during their investigations. After a week passes with no sign of a missing person, you kind of have to start assuming the worst. Nonetheless, we're usually the last resort for these cases after the police have done their thing. So my buddy went to work when he was called, and apparently he managed to dig up a couple of accounts saying that the kid was seen getting into an olive green SUV with a woman looking to be in her early 30s just hours before his disappearance was reported. His dad, my friend tells me, had left his son home alone for about a half an hour or so to go out for groceries. Why he didn't take his son along with him, I don't know. At first I thought it might have been deliberate, like he had for some reason done it on purpose, but then I reconsidered. I can only imagine the grief that must be felt after realizing one tiny burst of idiocy may have caused something so heart-wrenching to happen. Long story short, my buddy matches the description of the woman to a fair amount of other women. Short, mid-30s, long brown hair, overall rather average-looking. One sticks out, though. The boy's mother. The child's father had been granted sole custody of the kid, and apparently the kid's mom had a little cabin out in this area where she would regularly visit and spend days' worth of time in without alerting her husband. And whenever she was back home, she'd either be asleep or out somewhere, and never answered her phone. So my buddy says he wants me to team up with him on this one. We'll split the pay. He's in a slightly larger town and the closest one to mine, but it's still a good 5-hour drive, so he's going to handle things there while I take a look around here. Since he still has a few leads over on his end, he wants me to check out the mother, see if anything comes out of that. It appears to me at this point that the case is pretty cut and dry, so I accept. He emails me her address and a picture of her and the kid, and I finish up my paperwork before setting off. I drive to the address, and get kind of lost for a few minutes, but I finally catch sight of a gravel road that breaks through the wall of bark created by the forest border that I know is going to lead to this cabin. I'm not a big outdoorsy type of guy, and when I head into the boreal forest of this part of Canada, I always feel like the trees are closing in on me. It makes me uncomfortable. As I slowly pull down this path, towering green giants blot out the sun overhead, and I'm starting to regret taking this case. The gravel slowly turns to dirt, and the small break in the tree line slowly begins to disappear at my back. The silhouette of a small building finally comes into view off on the horizon, so with a small sigh, I park my car and get out. As much as I'd love to stay cooped up in my metal haven of protection, I'm here on a private investigation job, and I do have to remain relatively covert. And that's not happening if a car just suddenly pulls up onto the front lawn of an isolated cabin. As I get a little closer, I begin to notice something is just kind of off about the trees. I can't place exactly what it is. They just seem strange. I just don't know. The path eventually opens up into a small clearing, and a makeshift wooden gate sitting at the end of the path blocks the way to the cabin. It's not really stopping anybody, as there's no walls on either side of it. Its only purpose seems to be presenting a tattered no trespassing sign. Past the gate is the cabin. It looks to be in surprisingly good shape, and from the outside appears rather modern. In front of it is a small patch of grass which acts as a parking space. In a few areas in which it has been worn down by tires, the tracks lead right to the gate and the path I've just come down. Slowly but surely my eyes drift up from the patch of grass to the car that's been parked in it. my heart suddenly beginning to dance and around in a mixture of joy and dread. Yeah, it's a green olive SUV. I pull my camera up to my face and peer through the viewfinder. The SUV, the license plate, snap a picture of each. Slowly but surely, the frame drifts over to the cabin. I snap a picture of that, and it's at this exact moment that I realize the front door has been wide open the entire time I've been standing there. I go quiet on instinct, the surrounding area suddenly feeling like it's been hit with a blast of cold air. And then I heard it. A faint humming coming from inside the cabin. Soft, like a woman's voice. Once I hear it, I suddenly become unable to stop hearing it. It's a haunting, drifting tune, equal parts melodic and eerie. Every once in a while it stops or skips a little bit as if its source was running out of breath or having voice cracks. Before I even know it, I'm taking a step forward. I know it's a stupid idea, but my legs are moving faster than my mind. Just a little peek, I tell myself, just one peek to satiate my curiosity of what's in there. And that's it. The cabin loomed over me as I got closer. The grass crunched under my feet until finally, just barely, the inside of the building comes into view. And I stop dead in my tracks. Branches. It takes a moment to register, but there are tree branches covering the floor of this cabin. And when I say covering, I mean covering. These are not sticks. They're long, spindly, thin tree branches, deliberately cut from their trunks. Like a natural line, my gaze follows them to the single piece of furniture in the room. A small white coffee table with a CD player perched on top. And I realized why the humming sounded like it was skipping. The trees around me suddenly felt like they were closing in on every side, like the earth below my feet was trying to swallow me whole. I didn't take another moment to sit and deliberate on it. I just booked it out of there as fast as I could. I launched towards my car, slammed the door shut, put it into reverse, and punched it out of there. That place just felt wrong. The first thing I did was contact the police. I sure as hell was not going back there, but there was no way I was just going to let it sit there like that. They investigated and were just as weirded out as I was, but ultimately they didn't turn up anything of use. The cabin had been deserted, save for the sea of branches on the floor with a white coffee table and the lone CD player. The SUV was near pristine, not unlike a new car, and sat alone as well. The investigation continued for a while, but it was more or less a dead end. Nobody ever returned to that cabin. My buddy's leads never panned out either, and not surprisingly, the child's mother was also reported missing as well, shortly after we had visited the cabin. We never found any of them. In the end, things simply went in the cold case files. I most definitely have a few theories and ideas on what exactly went down with that place, but none of that can be proven, so I'll let you guys speculate for now. The spirits in our apartment. A number of years ago, as a poor student, I was renting the top 2 floors of a house with 7 other school friends. We thought ourselves lucky to get the house for such a low rent, and plus all the utilities were included. With 11 of us, we each paid about $75 a month. The house had its fair share of windows facing east and west, so it should be a brightly lit house in the daytime, but somehow the house was always rather dark and dim. We never could figure that out. Often at night we'd hear bumps and creaks, and we'd always put it up to it just being an old house. It was about 125 years old. Until one night, we changed our mind. It was a Friday night, just around spring. Exams were done. Winter was almost over. We were all really overjoyed and happy. We felt that we did well in our exams, too. So, that evening, 6 of us went to the movies and had dinner. After dinner, we headed home, and the celebration continued. We were drinking some soda. Some of the guys were drinking beer. We were just laughing and joking in the kitchen. Then we heard the front door open, footsteps coming up the stairs. We thought, oh, Jenny and Sue must be home. They had opted to go to a fellowship meeting rather than join us in our celebration. We called out to the 2 girls, but we received no answer. Tom poked his head outside the kitchen. The dim hallway was empty. We figured, incredible as it sounds, they probably didn't hear us making noise, so Tom went upstairs to the girls' room. A few minutes later, he came back downstairs looking very puzzled. The girls weren't home, yet we had heard someone open the front door and go up those stairs. We shrugged it off as the house settling down, or a bus or something maybe coming by in the street and shaking the house up. A week later, as I was sleeping, I woke up quite suddenly. Unsure what woke me up, I switched on the light. I looked around and peeked outside the door, and there was nothing there. I went to the kitchen to get myself a glass of water, and on the way I met Francis, who had just as suddenly woken up. We made some cups of soup and talked for about half an hour, and then we headed back to our respective rooms. Frank shared a room with Alex. As I couldn't sleep, I sat in bed reading when suddenly I heard a loud, high-pitched cackle. I froze, my eyes quickly scanning my small bedroom, but still there was nothing there. When I heard movement in the next room, I ran to the door, swung it open, just as Francis and Alex were about to crash into my room. The guys looked really angry. They thought I was the one that had given that laugh. I swore that it wasn't me when Dave and Rich joined us, while John, Sue, and Jenny came down the stairs out of their rooms. Everyone had heard that cackle. Alex and Francis, the oldest of us, calmed us down and gave a very logical explanation about what happened. We figured that the tenants renting the basement and first floor of the house were partying and the sound carried through the vents to our rooms. That sounds reasonable, right? The next day we called in on our neighbors, and no one came to the door. Puzzled, we went to the house next door, where our landlord lives. Our landlady told us in a rather cold voice that the other tenants had gone home for summer vacation, and we were the only ones in the house. Things went fine for a couple of weeks. Then, one night while we were having dinner, a sudden cold air came from nowhere, and the lights got really dim. We stared at each other. We all looked really nervous. The already dim hallway was black as night, and suddenly a low, very evil-sounding laugh started. Its volume got louder and louder, and that evil cackle joined it. Suddenly, Rich gave out a loud yell. The lights went back to the way they were before, and there was no one but us in the kitchen. After that point, the conversation on the dinner table was, why did Rich yell out, and how soon do we move out? Rich swore that he felt someone grab his throat, squeezing it. Eventually, we decided to stay on. The rent was just too cheap, and we couldn't afford anything higher. Besides, we were all good friends who really didn't want to part company. Most of us were from the same town. The next day we had to call an ambulance for Rich, who had suddenly developed a dangerously high fever overnight. At the hospital, Rich was diagnosed with throat cancer. The very strange thing is he didn't smoke, and there was no history of cancer in his family. The fever was not explained. The doctors did not know what caused it, as it went away soon after he was admitted. Rich was hospitalized for about 2 weeks, and sometime after 3 days or so, Rich decided that he didn't want us to visit anymore, and had arranged for his things to be packed and moved to a storage facility until he got out of the hospital. A few days after Rich moved out, Alex and I were on dinner duty. We heard the front door open and slam shut, and again we figured the others were home. We hollered out that dinner wasn't ready yet. Our announcement was greeted with silence. Immediately, Alex and I froze and stared at each other, our eyes mirroring the horror that we felt. We heard footsteps coming up the stairs. We both peeked out at the hallway, and nothing was there. No one was coming up those stairs. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs. The carpet depressed as the footsteps came closer and closer. Alex yelled at the nothing to just stop, go away, leave us alone. The footsteps continued towards us. We both felt a sense of foreboding, a danger, as though whatever it was approaching us was evil. The footsteps got to the middle of the hallway when Alex said to me in a hoarse whisper, "Get out of here, kid!" He grabbed me very hard by the arm, shoved me away from the kitchen door, and ran towards the large kitchen window. He grabbed a chair, smashed out the window, and practically half-dragged and threw me out of the window. We were on the second floor, but we were past caring. All we knew was we had to get away from that thing. The jump gave us some bruised limbs and a couple of sprains, but we got out of it okay. We looked up at the window, and there was a shadow there. Then the whole kitchen slowly got darker and darker, until the window looked like a black gaping hole in the house. Suddenly, the lights came back on in the kitchen. In spite of the fact that all we had on were t-shirt and jeans, Alex would not let me go back into the house. It was late spring, and the temperature was still kind of cold. Alex made us wait on the porch until the others came home. An hour or so later, when the other guys did get there, Alex made me wait outside as they trooped into the house. He got me a jacket, packed some things, and then called a cab, and we all headed for a motel on the lakeshore. We rented a room and stayed there for about a week until we found other accommodations. The next day we went back to the house to talk to the landlord about paying for the window. She was not thrilled with us. She started cursing and swearing at us, and we told her and her husband that take the last month's rent and here's extra for the window. What did she do? She called the cops on us. Luckily for us, the cops were quite understanding and polite. The landlady insisted that we did more damage than the window, and we entered the house to look. What a change. The whole place smelled dank, and the walls, like the paint, looked like someone ran something sharp over it. It really gave us the creeps. Landlady took one look at the walls, turned pale, and then refused to come into the house. Her husband ranted and raved all the way through. He wanted the police to charge us with destruction of property. The landlady, normally a quiet lady, glared at her husband and told him in a rather loud voice to shut up. Surprisingly, he did, for a while. As the landlady and her husband walked away, yelling and nagging at one another, the older police officer on the scene gave us a weak smile and mentioned that many years ago, once in the late 1800s, a man and his wife lived in the house we rented. One night, the police got a call. The couple, in a drunken fit, had killed their children and the husband's mother, after which the husband killed the wife as they were fighting. He stuffed the bodies into the closets and then hung himself. Apparently, the police frequently got calls from people who had lived in the house about intruders that weren't there. This had been going on for years. The police officer had grown up a few blocks away, and he mentioned that he has never known the house to be occupied by any family for more than a year at a time. Most often, it was less. We were in that house for about 2 months before we decided we had had enough. 3 times 3. I live in a pretty big house with a bunch of roommates, and at the time, 5 years ago, I was sharing a room with my best friend Kim and her boyfriend Michael. Just a heads up, the 3 of us are pagans, and we practice divination and certain forms of magic. Other than that, you wouldn't have been able to tell, just a bunch of nerds that had a little too much love for Netflix, gaming, and sleeping. The 3 of us had already been really good friends way before Kim and Michael started dating. Then, when they began dating, it brought us all even closer together. We did everything together, grocery shopping, went out to eat, outings with each other's families. It probably looked a little weird, but it was a cool relationship. Kim was very into World of Warcraft. She is on a very tight raid schedule where she cannot be bothered with anything else when she has to raid. So during her raid times, Michael and I were either watching Netflix, reading, or gaming. Mike started getting upset that Kim would rather play WoW than spend time with him, and he started getting annoyingly clingy, which transformed into this weird alpha act where he thought he was the head of the household, even over the other housemates. It started getting really creepy to the point where both Kim and I started spending hours in her car either driving around or hanging out in nearby parks just to get away from him. When you don't feel safe in your own home because your significant other is turning into a psychopath, that's when you call it quits. Kim broke up with Michael, and he moved out. It was a huge, messy ordeal that was so cringeworthy. There was an excessive amount of crazy, I miss you, I love you texts that ranged from take me back to you're a filthy slut unworthy of my love and time, and by the meantime I was getting texts from Michael that were talk to her or get her to take me back to this is all your fault, you were jealous of the relationship from the start, and so on. After a while, everything got pretty quiet. And then I started having small angry outbursts over dumb things like dirty dishes and the sort. I had always been a pretty level-headed, calm person before this. My outbursts became very volatile. I was screaming and breaking shit, just really uncomfortable, uncontrollable stuff. I felt like I was suffocating in our house, and I felt awful about the way I was acting at the same time. I literally felt like I was going to pieces. One evening, Kim and I were in the car talking about my state of mind and about how outside of the house I felt normal, but when I went inside I felt like I was drowning in rage, and I just felt so heavy I just wanted to lay down, cry, and sleep. She kept talking and looked in the rearview mirror and became very quiet. She said it's going to be okay, and that she needed a second and that I should go inside and take a nap. So I went inside. After about 10 minutes she came in and called her guild buddies and told them that she couldn't raid that night. She sat down next to me and we watched movies the entire evening. She was very uncharacteristically quiet over the next couple of days and stayed really close to me. I don't remember what happened one morning, but I had a supreme meltdown in the kitchen. Lots of crying and screaming that I wanted to die. I was knocking shit off of counters and raving, and finally Kim says, okay, this is getting ridiculous. And she called up 2 of our good friends to come over. While waiting, she fell to the floor, doubled over in pain, and just lay there. Moments later, in came our friends, Kenny and Bob. Kenny looked over at me and said, I don't want to alarm you, but you have something sitting on your shoulders, and it's not pretty. He came over and picked me up and just started to hug me. While he was holding me, Bob went over to Kim and started burning white sage around her. She finally straightened out and lifted up her shirt, and she had red marks all over her ribs. Bruises formed later. Being held and hugged by Kenny made me feel calm and normal and finally at peace. Bob hammered aloe leaves and sage above all of our doors and hung wooden runes from all of our windows, and to this day they're still there. And Kenny put me down on the couch with Kim. They opened all the doors and burned white sage all through the house. Kenny and Bob finally sat down and were basically like, what the fuck? How did this happen? Kim started explaining everything from the beginning, and then got to the part where she asked me to get out of the car. She said, in the shortened gist of things, I was talking to her, and I looked into my mirror and saw someone sitting in the back seat. I asked her to take a nap, and when I was alone with this thing, I asked, why are you here? It said that it was sent to punish me. She asked, why haven't you yet? And it said, she doesn't seem like the type of person I need to punish, so I've just been watching her. Kim then asked if it was the thing making me go crazy, and it said, no, that's someone else. She said she hasn't done anything to be punished, though, and it said, this is none of your business. It's between her and me and the other person. Don't interfere. Her scratches and bruises were her punishment for interfering. Basically, when Kim saw me having a meltdown, she thought that this can't continue and called our friends that are amazing at cleansing houses and banishing shit like this that doesn't belong. Towards the end of everything, we found out that Michael basically had called up something to haunt us and said that we were awful people, abusing magic and inflicting tons of harm on others. He asked anything that would come to punish us. The reason he didn't full-on curse us, but merely lied to some spirits to attack us, was to avoid a karmic bitch slap. And there comes the rule. 3 times 3. Anything you put into the universe, whether it's good or bad, you get back times 3. You do something good, you get good things back times 3. You do some bad shit, wish harm to others, yeah, you get that shit back times 3. Also, I would like to add, spirits don't like being lied to and being used, so Michael, I hope you had fun answering to them. Hello, Uncle Josh here. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed these true scary stories from around the world. If you are interested in having your story shared on the air, please email unclejoshscarystories@gmail.com. In the subject line, please let me know the nature of your story. Also, remember to omit any real person's name that is involved in your story, and also send a short note of consent letting me know that I have your permission to share your story. Thanks again for listening. Stay tuned for more of Uncle Josh's true scary stories.